All right, let's talk about a word that's loaded with mystery and, let's be honest, a lot of misconceptions. Tantra. It's a term so many of us have heard, but what does it really mean? So let me ask you, straight up, when you hear that word Tantra, what's the very first thing that pops into your head? Because if you're like most people, especially in the West, it's probably something to do with sex, right? Intimacy, maybe. And look, you're not totally off base for thinking that. That image is pretty much everywhere in pop culture. But what's really fascinating is that this connection isn't just some modern Western invention. Our sources actually point to ancient Indian temples with incredibly explicit erotic sculptures. So yeah, this link between Tantra and sensuality, it's definitely historical. But stopping there would be like seeing just the tiny tippy top of a massive iceberg. The truth is, the tradition of Tantra is so much bigger, so much more vast and profound than that one popular image lets on. Okay, so let's move beyond that cliche. In this first section, we're going to start to unpack what this deeply complex spiritual tradition is really all about. Let's start with the word itself, Tantra. It's a Sanskrit term, and it literally means to weave or loom. And honestly, that's the perfect metaphor. Tantra isn't just one single thread. Think of it as this huge, intricate tapestry of texts, practices, and philosophies, all woven together with one big goal in mind: spiritual liberation. So if it's this giant system, what exactly is it mapping out? Well, that brings us to our next section, which gets into this incredible idea of the human body as its own self-contained universe. Right at the heart of this inner map is a concept called prana. You can think of it as the vital life force, this fundamental energy that flows through all of us. And a huge goal in a lot of tantric practice is to learn how to consciously control and direct that energy. Now, I know this might sound a little out there, maybe a bit esoteric, but what's really cool is our sources give us some helpful modern analogies to wrap our heads around it. Prana, this vital energy, think of it like bioenergy. The nadis, these subtle channels for the energy, that's kind of like our nervous system. And the chakras, the big energy centers, they correspond pretty closely to our glandular centers. It's like a spiritual blueprint laid right over our physical body. And this perspective, it completely changes the game. It means the body is no longer just flesh and bone. In this view, it's a microcosm of the entire cosmos. Everything that's out there is also in here. Okay, so if your body is a whole cosmos, how in the world do you explore it? Well, that's what our third section is all about. These powerful technologies of the self that are used for transformation. And one of the most important of all these technologies is the mantra. This is a sacred sound or phrase that you repeat to literally alter your state of consciousness. For example, one of our sources, Kali Mantra Magic, dives deep into mantras dedicated to the goddess Kali. So how does this actually work in practice? What do you do? Well, our sources break it down into a pretty straightforward process. First, you focus your attention, really focus, on an image or a statue of a deity. Second, you just recite the mantra over and over again to build this internal resonance, this vibration. And finally, you use that resonance to actually feel the presence of that deity, filling your awareness. It's a very direct technique for shifting your consciousness. And repetition is absolutely central to this practice. You've probably seen mala beads, those strings of beads used for counting. Well, they typically have 108 beads. And that's because 108 is a sacred number in many Hindu traditions. It represents a complete cycle of the practice. But why? What's the ultimate point of all this? A quote from one of our sources just sums it up perfectly. The goal is to be progressively liberated from the bonds of materiality. These mantras aren't just for chanting. They are practical tools designed to fundamentally change your very perception of reality. But here's the thing. This path of radical self-transformation, it wasn't always accepted. Not by a long shot. In our final section, we're going to look at the controversial history of Tantra and find out why some of its followers were basically seen as heretics. As the scholar Wendy Doniger puts it, certain tantric rituals were clearly antagonistic to Vedic religion. This shows that Tantra wasn't just another philosophical school of thought. It was often a direct, provocative challenge to the established religious order of the day. A perfect and kind of wild example of this is a sect called the Kapalikas. Their name literally means skull bearers. Yeah, you heard that right. And they were notorious for challenging orthodox beliefs head-on. And even though they were considered heretics, their influence spread all across ancient India. So this history really shows Tantra as this powerful and often rebellious countercultural movement. It didn't just exist within the mainstream, it often thrived on the fringes, constantly pushing social and religious boundaries to forge a different kind of spiritual path. Phew. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From sex to skulls to sacred sounds. So, what is Tantra, really? Where does all this leave us? Let's try to bring it all together. Tantra is this incredibly complex system. It's made up of bodily practices, powerful rituals like mantra, a really deep philosophy about liberation, and, yeah, a controversial and countercultural history. It's all of those things. So I think the most important takeaway is this. Tantra is not one single thing. It's better to think of it as a diverse family of spiritual technologies, all designed for one purpose, exploring the very nature of reality. And this whole idea leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to chew on. The entire tantric worldview is basically built on the idea that we can intentionally re-engineer our own consciousness. So if the mind can actually reshape our experience of reality, well then what are the limits of human potential?